Okay, today we're going to be doing factoring and solving. So we've already been factoring by grouping, so now we're going to add an extra step. Some of you are like, well, why do you want me to factor and solve? Well, these polynomials that we have been working with all have a degree of 2. So that means they all are what we call quadratics. Let me write that down real quick for us. So everything we've been factoring has been called a quadratic. That means it has a degree of 2. That's the highest exponent number. Now, what do these graphs look like? So let me show you a graph. This is a graph of a quadratic. This is the quadratic x squared plus 5x plus 6. Normally, I would have you factor by grouping and find the factors. Now, what does that really mean? Well, if we take each one of our factors and we solve each one, then we can find the 2 places where our graph actually touches the x-axis. Our graph touches right here at -3, 0, and our graph touches at -2, 0. Notice each one of these coordinates has a 0. So we're going to use something called the zero product property. We're going to be looking for where does our quadratic graph touch the x-axis. So, and to begin with this, we're going to use something called the zero product property. Zero product property. Okay, what does that mean? That means we're going to take each one of our factors and we're going to set it equal to 0. So as you see, I took the graph that we had, which was x squared plus 5x plus 6, and I went ahead and factored it for you. I went ahead and factored my grouping and found these were the 2 parentheses. So what are we going to do now that we can factor? We're going to take each one of the parentheses and set it equal to 0, because we showed you in a second ago on the graph that we do have to have part of our x-intercept has to equal 0, where it touches the x-axis. So to find that first x number, I'm going to take away 3 on both sides of this equation, and I'm going to find that it touches at -3. We'll go back and check and see if our graph did touch at -3. Now we're going to take the second set of parentheses. I'm going to subtract 2 on both sides. I found that x is equal to a -2. I apologize. Let's go back and look at our graph. Did our graph really touch at -3 and -2 on the x-axis? Yes, it did. Okay, so what we're trying to do now is something called factoring by grouping, and then you're going to take each factor, set it equal to 0, so you can figure out where your graph touches the x-axis. So let's try another one. Let's go to number 1. For instance, what would happen if I already factored it for you? Could you do number 1? Could you take each of your factors, set it equal to 0, and solve? So for the first one, I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. I'm going to get 2x is equal to -3. I'm going to divide by 2. Now, y'all are pros at solving, so this should not be an issue. And I get -1.5. That means my graph will touch the x-axis at -1.5. I can take the second, I can set that equal to 0, I apologize, add 4 to both sides. And that means I get x is equal to +4. That means my graph of that quadratic equation would touch the x-axis at -1.5 and +4. What if it's not factored for you? Here we go for number 3. That means you have to factor it yourself. So we're going to factor by grouping and then set it equal to 0. So for number 3, the first thing we would do is put a 1 in the front. Now remember when we do these, I'm going to pick a different color real quick, that we've got to multiply the first times the last. That is a 6. By the way, it's a +6. I also know it's +5 in the middle, so it's a positive. How do I get 6? 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. I now go back. I do my x squared plus 2x plus 3x. These are my 2 middle numbers, plus 6. Go ahead and do our big T chart. Find the GCF on the left. That's going to be 1x. Find the GCF on the right-hand side. That is going to be 3. That is one of my parentheses. How do I find the second? I go ahead and divide. 1x squared divided by 1x is going to leave me with 1x. And 2x divided by 1 is going to leave me with 2. If I divide on the right-hand side, 3x divided by 3, it's still 1x. And 6 divided by 3 is still 2. Now, here's the new stuff. So what am I going to do with my new stuff? I'm going to take each one of my parentheses, set it equal to 0. Once I set each one equal to 0, I'm going to solve so I can figure out where would that graph touch the x-axis. If I subtract 3 on both sides here, I find out that my graph would touch at -3. That's one spot it would touch. Subtract 2 on this side. And it would also touch at -2. That is the exact example that we started with. If you'll notice, we got the same answer. I'm going to go to number 5. When I get to number 5, I notice this one's missing something. We did this right before we left. It means it's missing a middle term, so I'm going to put 0x in the middle. It doesn't matter if you use minus or positive. It's 0 no matter what. And I'm ready to do first times last. That is a -25. I'm going to go ahead and write the factors of 25. Now, I need to remember something. This is a negative, so that means positive, negative. Now, some of you already noticed that it's probably going to be 5 and 5 are going to make 0. So it doesn't matter which one you get the positive to, which one you get the negative. These two add up to be 0. So I'm going to go back, put these over here on my screen. So I have now the 1x squared minus 5x. Doesn't matter if you put minus 5x or positive 5x there. Still going to give us the same answer in the end. Go ahead and do my t-chart. The GCF on the left is going to be 1x. The GCF on the right is going to be 5. That is my first set of parentheses. Some of you don't have to put the 1 in front. You can go ahead and get rid of it if you want to. I now need to divide 1x squared divided by 1x leaves me with x or 1x, and -5x divided by 1x it leaves me with -5. Now what are we going to do? We're going to take each one of these and set it equal to 0 because we are factoring and solving now. Remember, we want to find out where would this quadratic touch the x-axis. I'm going to move my screen up just for a second here. If I solve the first one by subtracting 5, I get x is equal to -5. That means it touches the x-axis at -5. If I add 5, I'm going to get x is equal to +5. That means my quadratic will touch at -5 and +5 on the x-axis. We're going to go do number 6. Number 6 is a little different. There's a problem. My 3 numbers, my 3 terms are not on the same side. And for me to do this, they all have to be on the same side together. So that 3 needs to move. Now, when I move it, I just can't leave it 3. When I move it, I'm going to have to actually turn it negative. So this is really 6x squared minus 7x minus 3 equals 0. Now, I am ready to go ahead and get ready to start factoring this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply first times last, which is -18. I know the factors of 18 are 1 and 18, 2 and 9, and 3 and 6. All right, it's -18, so that's positive negative. I'm going to look in the middle. The middle number is a -7, which means big number has to get the negative. Is there any 2 numbers over here in our t-chart that will add up to be -7? And most of you already see these are the 2 numbers we're going to be using. So when I'm going to go back, I'm going to write those down. So now my middle term becomes positive 2x, -9x, and the -3 is still in the back. I'm ready to t-chart. The GCF on the left is 2x. The GCF on the right is -3. Remember, there's a negative in the front. Go ahead and put the negative sign. That is my first set of parentheses. And I'm ready to divide. 6x squared divided by 2x is 3x, and 2x divided by 2x makes positive 1. The new stuff, here we go. Now with the new stuff, what are we going to do? We're going to take each one of these factors and set it equal to 0. So I'm going to erase a little bit where I'm going to actually go over here so you can see what's going on. So I'm going to take this one right over here. So I now have 2x minus 3 equals 0. I'm going to add 3 to both sides. I get 2x is equal to positive 3. I divide by 2. That means x is equal to 1.5. That means that quadratic will touch the x-axis at 1.5. Take the second parentheses. Set it equal to 0. Subtract 1. That leaves me with 3x is equal to -1. Divide by 3. Now this is going to be a repeating decimal, so we may want to leave it as the fraction. What I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to erase a little bit at the top. I apologize up here just so I have a little extra space. So when I'm ready to start writing this, I would get x is equal to a negative 1/3. Now, if you really want to turn it to a decimal, please be careful. It is repeating, and you will need to put the repeating sign. I prefer you to leave it as a fraction if possible. So the biggest issues for us to think about is this. We're going to factor by grouping as normal. We're going to take each parenthesis, set it equal to 0, and solve for the x. We should be solving and getting 2 answers. We cannot solve unless all 3 numbers are on the same side. So I'm going to show you one more time with number 7 what needs to happen. We'll erase everything very quickly to get it out of our space. Meaning, when I get to number 7, I cannot do number 7. Why? This 14x and this 3 are not on the left side with the 5x. They have to move. If I move them across the equal sign, the 14 becomes negative 14x, the positive 3 becomes negative 3, and now I am ready to factor by grouping. Once I factor by grouping, I'm going to take each parenthesis, set it equal to 0, and solve. Good luck. If you need any help, you know you can call or email Ms. Brown or myself.